Hello, my name is Jonathan Fix. Thanks for watching my video. Today I get to share with you one of my passions, and it has to do with learning the biblical languages, Greek and Hebrew, and how that affects the quality of translation for many translators. Many of you know of this passion, but why? Why do Bible translators need to learn the Greek and Hebrew language? That's an interesting thought. And that's an important question to ask. So let's get started. So let's ask the question, how does knowing Greek help the translator? My wife and I, we went to Israel to study Greek and Hebrew so that we can go back and help nationals and our fellow expat missionary translators. And so why is studying Greek important? Why is learning that language, the language of the New Testament, important? And in 2018, I actually led a devotional in Papua New Guinea for a Greek refresher course for missionaries like myself. And this book here, Devotions on the Greek New Testament, is what I used for one of the chapters in there. And so I wanted to, once again, use this to show how important it is for translators to know the Greek and how that affects their translation work. And so before we dive into the passages that we're going to be looking at, the passages are going to be Mark 1 and 5, where Jesus heals two people who were considered unclean, and he heals them by touching them. And so Mark is also using the Greek grammar in a certain way that highlights this. And so this is really important for translators to see and be able to do this as well in their language if they can, or just make sure that the intent that Mark's intending comes out in their translation. And so let's look at the context and the Bible backgrounds of these verses before we dive into it. So here we have Isaiah talking about when the Messiah comes, what is it going to be like? Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, the ears of the deaf will be unstopped, the lame will leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute will shout for joy. And in here we have Jesus and Luke responding to the disciples of John, and Jesus says, "Go and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them." And so this is some of the backgrounds, the two backgrounds that we need to consider when we're going to be approaching Mark's passage. We also need to consider, okay, when you're talking about lepers and other people who are unclean, what did the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, what did that say concerning those who were unclean? So let's look at what the Torah said. Leviticus and Numbers, it basically says that, these two people that Jesus is coming in contact with, the woman who is having a long flow of blood for many years, and this man who has a skin disease, these are both considered unclean. And if a person touches them, they also become unclean. And so that's what the Torah says. And now we have the backgrounds of what the Messiah, what he's going to be doing. He's going to be healing. He's going to be doing all this. And so now we have the Bible backgrounds to the passages we're going to be looking at. We now need to understand some of the grammar that Mark uses. And I'm going to use an illustration of in English to help you understand what's the difference between the mainline event and participles. And so we have an example text here that I just put together, a little mini story. And so let's read it. After going to the store and paying for his Coke, the man returned to his house, finding his armchair ripped by the dog. After searching for the dog and spilling his Coke on the floor, he found his dog hiding behind the couch, whimpering. And so here I have highlighted in blue the participles that are being used. And in green, I have the mainline verbs. And so what does it mean to be a mainline verb? A mainline verb is an activity or an event that helps move the story along. It is more prominent than the other verbs. And the other verbs, clauses, are used to support the event that's going on in the mainline verb. So, for instance, um, after going to the store and paying for his Coke, the man returned. And so it's the whole clause is talking about the sentence is talking about when the man returned, what happened. And also these participles do not have their, let's say they don't have their own time when it comes to tense. Um, they have a time with a reference to another verb. Without the main verb return, the after going and paying doesn't really make sense. There's not a placement in time for this, except when it is with the understanding of the man returned to his house. And so in this way, these participles in blue are dependent on the mainline verbs that are in green. And so this is what we have in English, and also something very similar happens in the Greek language. And so we're going to look at an English translation of the Greek, but we're also going to have that blue highlighted and the green highlights for the participles and for the main verbs. So here we have our passage Mark 5, and this is where the woman and her for many years had been bleeding. And so let's go ahead and just read this. So Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. And a woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from the many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them. But she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. Immediately, the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. So here, this is the blue are participles in the Greek. And here and previously, I marked out participles primarily with the ing form: going, paying, finding, searching, spilling, whimpering, hiding. All these forms to signal that these are dependent clauses that are dependent on the main clause, the main verb, returned and found. Similarly, the verbs in blue are also participles in the Greek, and they're dependent on the main verb that's highlighted in green. There's only one, touched. And so you see here, you have her suffering, her bleeding, her spending money and not getting any better and getting worse. And she heard, and she even came up behind him. All these are all things that are leading up to the main event. And so Mark is creating this suspense of, okay, what is going on? You haven't actually told us what is the main event that's happening. He's backgrounding all of this. And so he forces his readers to kind of be on the edge of their seat, waiting, okay, what's gonna happen? And then boom, she touches him. And that is the mainline event, the main event that actually happens. And so Mark is highlighting this for his audience when they're reading that, oh, wow, this woman who is unclean touched Jesus, and he's pinpointing this out. And as a result of her touching him, Jesus is not made unclean. Actually, power comes out of him, and she is made clean and healed, and her bleeding stops. And Mark is wanting to pinpoint this, that Jesus is not being made unclean, but he is the one making clean. And so this is really important for us to see that this verb is the mainline verb and is the main event of this section. Likewise, Mark does this again in Mark chapter 1 when a man with skin disease comes up to Jesus, pleading for him to be healed. So let's read it. A man with leprosy came and knelt in front of Jesus, begging to be healed. He said, "If you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean," he said. Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out and touched him. "I am willing," he said, "be healed." Instantly, the leprosy disappeared and the man was healed. So here also, the verbs in blue are highlighted, showing that these are participles in the Greek. These are not mainline verbs. It's not until you get to the word touched, once again, that you have a mainline event. And this is the event that Mark is wanting his audience to focus on. Once again, the unclean person, according to the Torah, just like the woman who has been bleeding for years, is unclean. But instead of Jesus becoming unclean as a result of touching him, Jesus touches him and makes him clean and heals him, just like the Messiah, the King Messiah, was prophesied to do. And you have these background verbs, these participles that are subordinate to this mainline verb, touched. And so we can see that what Mark is trying to do is really cool in the grammar. And a lot of times this is actually not seen in a lot of translations, and it's no fault of the translation. So let's look at several translations. These are the most common translations that were bought in 2022. And you see here that some of these verbs, you see some participles in English, but some of them you see actual just verbs, like, and he begged him on his knees. That's a mainline verb in English. He came to him, explore. That's a mainline verb. And you have such things that, the KJV, you have a beseeching him, kneeling down and saying it to him, and moved with compassion. Well, moved with compassion in the KJV, that's a mainline verb. And so we have good translations that have difficulty expressing the nuance that Mark is trying to convey. And really, there's nothing wrong with these translations at all. They're correct. And as translators, we are always struggling and wrestling with the original language and the culture and how to bring that over accurately, clearly, and naturally. And the thing is, in Greek, it's very natural to put a lot of participles, dependent clauses, to make it as background information, and then boom, you have the mainline event, and that's fine. It does create some suspense, but that's fine to do. It's not unnatural to do that. In English, that would be very unnatural to do that. You have a man with leprosy coming and kneeling in front of Jesus and begging him to be healed. "If you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean," being moved with compassion, and Jesus reaching out his arm, touched. Like, it just doesn't seem natural. It seems that would be really forced. And so the translators are forced to go with a more natural expression, the natural meaning of the text, in which they did a really good job. Actually, all of them did a really good job. And so, but you see that the original Greek, what Mark was doing, he was really pinpointing this this verb, this mainline event, the touching of Jesus is what he really wanted his audience to focus on. And because they were well aware that the touching of an unclean person made that person unclean. But here he is wanting to convey that that did not happen. And in fact, the Messiah, when he came, Jesus, and he touched, his touch was a healing touch, and power went out from him, and he was not made unclean. And so that's really neat. If there's some languages that can have a lot of background information and use participles or some other linguistic form to convey that, that'd be great. That's exactly what Mark was doing. And that is why it's important for translators to be able to pick that up and see what is the Greek text actually saying, and how can we express that as much as possible naturally, clearly, and accurately in a different language, which is really difficult, but it's so much fun to do. But that's really why it's so important for translators to know the Greek language. And I want to leave you with one of Jenny's and I's favorite books and movies, actually, that talks about the healing touch of the king. And here you have Tolkien saying, "For it is said in old lore, the hands of the king are the hands of a healer." And so the rightful king could ever be known. And so I want to show you a video clip that's been deleted that was part of the Return of the King that shows Aragorn, the king, the returning king, coming and being the one that is able to heal people just by touching. And so that really, I use that as a way to visualize what's going on in the New Testament when Jesus is healing. I'm not comparing Aragorn to Jesus, but it's just a really good way to see how Mark brings out the event touch and the power that that has, and as Jesus being the king. And so let's watch this clip. I'm hope you enjoyed learning about participles, mainline verbs, Bible backgrounds, and the importance of learning the Greek language is for translators, and how this is going to be really influential in our work with our Wycliffe ministry and helping translators and missionaries gain increasing their knowledge in the biblical languages. Thanks for watching, and here's this clip for you to watch. Wow. I wish they would kept that in the movie. Imagery of Aragorn being the king, able to heal. It's so helpful for me to see that, especially it reminds me of this text where Jesus is the king and his touch is so powerful and can heal. So thanks for watching this video. Hope you learned a lot, and we'll see you later. Take care. Bye.